Oh, I hope it reminds us, as I have mentioned from time to time, how important it is to keep our Bible whole, to never ignore, neglect, or unhitch ourselves from the Old Testament, to realize that the prophets of old had something important to say then, and they've got something important to say now. As we read the Old Testament through the lens of the Christ event, through the prism of the cross, through the person of Christ, we can see even more clearly what they were trying to say, because it was the Holy Spirit who was communicating through them, sometimes things that they didn't fully understand. But they wrote it down, they were faithful, they preached, they wrote, and we have it. And like I've said before, the New Testament makes no sense without the Old Testament. And so let us understand these things. Let us never unhitch ourselves or neglect the Old Testament. It is the testimony of Christ. In fact, look what verse 11 says about this. Searching, the prophets of old searching, what or what manner of time the Spirit of Christ who was in them. They're under the inspiration of God. The inspiration of the Spirit of Christ who was in them was indicated when he testified beforehand the sufferings of Christ and the glories that would follow. Let's go to Isaiah 53. Well known, hopefully, to everyone here, but worth our reading. So Isaiah has the Spirit of Christ within him. And he calls out in verse 1, "Who has believed our report? And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed?" For he, who you talking about, Isaiah? I don't know, but the Spirit of Christ is upon me. I see a man. Let me write about this man. Let me preach about this man. The Spirit of Christ is telling me about a man. For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant. He'll grow up before the Lord, before God, in the presence of God, with the Spirit of God upon him, you might say, as a tender plant. And as a root out of dry ground, this man has no form or comeliness. Well, this is odd, Isaiah. What is this? What is this wretch that you are speaking of? This ugly wretch. When we see him, Isaiah says, the Spirit of Christ is testifying in me. Well, there's no beauty that we would desire him. And then we start reading the Gospels and we remember, as much as we who are here love Jesus, though we've never seen him, as we said, we keep coming across people who didn't love him, who didn't receive him, who didn't want him, and eventually sought his death and crucified him. As beautiful as we see the Christ, Isaiah long ago, hundreds of years before Jesus comes, before the Gospels are even imagined, he says, this man that I see, he's a wretch, and he's rejected, and he's despised. And there's just nothing about him in our flesh that would draw us to him. What a strange way to speak about who we would know to be Jesus Christ. He is despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. Can you see Jesus at the tomb of Lazarus? What's he doing? Well, he's crying. His eyes are full of tears. He's convulsing with grief. People speculate why he cried, but it's enough to see that he weeps, that Jesus wept. He was acquainted with grief. And Isaiah, by the Spirit of Christ, what does he say? And we hid, as it were, our faces from him. Peter, are you one of his disciples? I don't know that man. I think I recognize you. Didn't you follow him? I don't know what you're talking about. Wait a minute. Yes, I recognize you. No, I swear I do not know that man. He was despised, and we did not esteem him. Surely he has borne our griefs. No wonder he's acquainted with grief. Surely he has carried our sorrows. No wonder he's a man of sorrows. And what did we think about his grief and sorrow? He's stricken, afflicted, and smitten by God. And that's what they said about him. He's a blasphemer. Those miracles he does by the power of Beelzebub. Who should we release? Barabbas, an insurrectionist? Or Jesus, who is called the Christ? Give us Barabbas. Don't give us this man. He's under the judgment of God. But Isaiah says, I see something more. I see this man, this wretch. I see this man who is full of grief and sorrow. I see this man who was rejected by his own people. I see this man who was considered judged of God. But there's something else going on here. And it must have confused the prophet. Even though I see a wretch, even though I see a man who is apparently being judged by God, yet he's wounded for our transgressions. What is this that I see? What is the Spirit of Christ telling me? What is it I am preaching? What is it I am proclaiming? What is it I am writing? What is the Spirit of Christ testifying about? Who is this wretch? Who is this man of grief and sorrow judged by God? He is wounded for our transgressions. He is bruised for our iniquities. And why is he chastised? The chastisement of our peace is upon him. Because he is chastised and afflicted, I have peace. And by his stripes, we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray, Isaiah says. We have turned every one to his own way. And the Lord, and yet here we are. We can see so clearly. We can see so obviously. And yet, do we take it for granted? Has the privilege lost its luster? Has the joy begun to fade? Has the smile that once lit our faces in hearing about the gospel no longer as easily conjured? Let it never be said of us that we have forgotten about the joy of the Lord and that his gospel, that means good news.